Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Carey, and I'll be doing my project on the country Eritrea. So, what is Eritrea? So, a little background information. It's located in the Horn of Africa. It's bordered by Sudan in the west and Ethiopia in the south. The capital is Asmara, and it's made up of about 650,000 people. The population as a whole for the country is 5 million. There are 9 recognized ethnic groups in the population. As of 2015, 62.9% of the population follows Christianity. The government is a one-party state. One-party state. So national elections have never been held since its independence, which we'll get to later on in the PowerPoint. So why I chose this country? So it's one of the most censored countries in the world. It's always in the top 10, usually right around with North Korea. It actually ranks number one according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is the CPJ.org. And as a journalist student and as my minor and someone who's trying to get into the field of journalism, it's important to understand and have that freedom of speech and expression. Where we'll find out in this country that that really isn't an option here anymore, and it never really has been. And it's really one of the biggest problems for journalists who need to go into this state and those who, the punishments that are involved with getting into this. So basically, a little bit more background information about the history of Eritrea. The fight for independence, this was centered around the Eritrean War, fought between the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean separationists. It lasted just a little about over 30 years, or a little less than 30 years. It lasted from September 1st, 1961 to May 24th, 1991. And then on May 28th, 1993, the United Nations formally admitted Eritrea into its membership. And this whole war was basically started because the border protected between them was violated, and Ethiopia was pretty much telling Eritrea to get rid of their soldiers from that border. That triggered a whole bunch of events and led to this almost 30-year war for their independence. The politics in Eritrea, so a lot of things are going on right now, or have been going on. Their main legal party is called the People's Front for Democracy and Justice, also called the PFDJ. All the political party groups are not allowed to organize. The Eritrean constitution is mostly ignored when it comes to media, as we'll get to later on. We'll see that it states that people have their freedom of speech, but that is ignored by most because of the afraid of corruption of the government, as we'll get to later on about how this government is really run. Speaking of the government, the elections have been postponed numerous times throughout this country, or throughout the history of this country. This includes a 2001 incident where national elections were to take place, but because of 20% of Eritrea's land was under occupation, elections were postponed and until they resolved their issues with Ethiopia as drama still started to flare up. And their current leader right now, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this name, is Isaias Afwerki. He has held power since 1993 when he was first elected, and since then there have been no general elections since his rise to power. So, censorship and how this country works. It is the only state to allow disseminated media or disseminated news. The last accredited international correspondent was expelled in 2007. The last independent media that was there has been closed since 2001. The Eritrean authorities have reportedly imprisoned the fourth highest amount of journalists. They are the fourth highest, right behind Turkey, China, and Egypt. And there is less than 1% of the population is able to access online content, which that's coming from the UN International Telecommunication Union. And the graph to the right of this kind of shows, even though it's a little bit small, kind of shows you that yes, the internet has risen to those who have had this access before, but as you can see from the left side, it is still less than 1% of the population. And we'll get to that a little bit later about why that is. So, government control. I found this quote from the Freedom House, which is a U.S.-based international human rights organization. It says, quote, "The government makes an effort to block many websites managed by Eritrean exiles." Basically, what this is saying is that despite the country having less than 1% of the population being able to access online websites, the government is so controlling, they are still willing to shut down websites to those who can still try to access the internet from inside and outside the country. The government owns a monopoly over broadcasting since their independence. Most, if not all, privately owned newspapers were closed in 2001 as part of one of their crackdowns they had on the opposition, going back to them being afraid of corruption, leading to we call it uprisings and any kind of riots. They didn't want any of that to happen in that country, so they shut down all of the privately owned newspapers, which is a huge, I think, to me, a huge invasion of not privacy, but to that freedom of speech as what we journalists try to get. So Eritrea, this is the Eritrean Telecommunications Corporation. It's the sole operator of landline telephone communication infrastructure in Eritrea. This was introduced in March of 2004 in the country. And the thing about this, what makes it so important, it works with the government by having all mobile communication goes through Eritrea, which then has to go through the government. So in order to get stuff out on the web and out online, that the country has to go, the people have to go through this operator, which then is owned and powered up by the government. So really, it's kind of a double filter, or how they like to call it, a gateway that this government has, and the tight lockdown they have on this country. What is available? So right now there are four kinds of press, different kinds of press released throughout the country, all of which are government owned. They have the Hadis Eritrea, which is basically their main newspaper. It is owned by the government. It's published 3 days a week. It's basically their local news. You know, the stuff we see every kind of day. Like, you know, we have the Cincinnati Enquirer. We have whatever happens in Kentucky. I'm not from here. But we also have the Eritrea Profile, which is weekly, and it's more, it's in English. So because of how diverse the country is, there's still a lot of people that speak English. So, or at least other languages that aren't the main language, they are able to get that paper. The Trigata, I believe, it's the pro-government youth weekly. It's also owned by the ruling party, which is the PFDJ, and the Jalid, which is a weekly youth paper. So examples of the papers. So the one on the left is the Hadas, and the one on the right is the Profile. Just like I said, these are more of the general newspapers that you see in every kind of country that gives you the local and regional news. I couldn't find any examples of the Trigata and the Jalid. So, a fear of the press. What happens here? So, many journalists do not live in the country anymore, if really any of them. There is a fear of imprisonment that has led many journalists into exile. That people, if you get caught going against the government in this kind of way, there is no trial and you are sent straight to jail. And in 2013, according to the CPJ.org, 23 journalists were sent to jail in this country. That is the most that's ever happened really in that 1 year. And I believe it even was in December of that year. That'll happen just in 1 month. And there's no international correspondence in the country. So, like I said, getting the news out of that country is very hard, because what you have to base it off what the government has, what that Eritrea, and what the papers say, which again also comes back from the government still controlling and owning what is going on. The television and radio, on that side, it's a state-run channel, and this has news, music videos, any kind of reality shows that the country produces. The other channel talks more about the national and international sports news, so kind of more about what's going on in the outside world. Like I said, those are the only 2 channels that they offer. Both of them are state-run. Voice of the Broad Masses of Eritrea. This is one of their radios. It's state-run, operates 2 networks with 11 different languages. And all outside information and news must go through Eritrea. Like I was saying before, how it's one big circle with the government, how really it's a double filter for them to see what comes in, what comes out. And due to the lack of internet and the lack of how many people have access to it, it is limited to reach the outside news because of these different kind of filters. So the last thing I want to talk about is the Arena. This is a government-operated Eritrean news agency that is responsible for collecting local, regional, and international news. And like I said, because it goes to the government, they are ultimately in charge of what is published, use of internet to get their information, and choose how to spread it. And basically, what happens here? This is one of the more newer kind of things they're trying to implementing. A lot of countries in the UN, or especially a bunch of countries in the UN and Europe, are trying to provide aid for the country to try to help get this censorship away and try to lead this country more to more of a fair democracy. So, like I said, getting more national elections, getting more of a voice, and getting more of that freedom of expression, be able to write for a paper and be able to produce things. But as of now, it's still like I said, one of the most censored countries in the world. And as a journalist, it's important to know and really not take what we have for granted, because we have it really easy in America where we get, we can publish whatever we want online, whatever we want in the paper. But here you see that there are serious consequences to posting really just about anything you want, and how so much control can come from the government over this country that has just around 5 million people. So seeing the impact that these guys have made, that this government has made on this country, and how tightly controlled it is, and how there are very little loopholes, and the loopholes that do get out usually lead to consequences to these other journalists. I think that's one of the most important reasons, and really the main reason why I chose to cover this country. So thank you all for listening.